question is, what's the policy conclusion? How do you deal with that as a politician? Now, one way to look at it, and I think the most intuitive to many people, is to say, okay, if agglomeration, if clusters is such a good thing, let's create it. Let's pay companies to move to our location, and then all these good things will happen automatically. Now, the reality I think that we've seen is that doesn't happen. It's very hard to get these companies to come, so you have to intervene very early. You have to intervene with a lot of money. So economists like to talk about big push kind of models where you have to really have an effect on the evolutionary processes. But we know that government is very bad at really picking the right kind of situations, picking the right winners. And so the track record of these policies is very bad. People argue with good reason are quite critical of these. Now, the way that we look at cluster policy, and I think that we've seen cluster policy evolve over the years, is quite different. It is really leveraging existing agglomerations, existing clusters, and helping them through those interventions to work together much better, to become more effective in using the assets that we have in our regional economy. So that makes them stronger, more competitive, and that will, over time, attract more companies to come in. But that's the result. That's not the intervention that you should be looking for. So we are talking about cluster policy much more these days as a tool for economic policy and as a way to become more effective in the way that government and the private sector interact.
Okay, really interesting. So, but with this tool, I mean, obviously it's about improving the dynamics of clusters a lot.
That's right.
Have you seen any programs here in Europe that play such a role where you increase dynamism of clusters? Are there any national programs around of this policy?
Some of my colleagues recently looked a little bit at the European cluster policy landscape, and what they found is quite interesting. There's hardly any European country left that doesn't have a cluster policy.
Oh,
now,
okay.
Whether that's good or bad, we'll have to judge after a couple of years of experience. But let me just pick two countries that have very high-level cluster policy programs, and that differ somewhat in their structure. One is France, traditionally very centralized economic policy approach. France has used the Pôle de Compétitivité program to really bring up a new dynamism, a new creativity to the way that it's conducting its innovation and its regional policy. One important element is that it's using a competition. So there was an open call, different clusters or cluster-like consortia from different regions could really compete for the funding from the government level. The second very important element in France is that they then created different levels. So they have some clusters that really compete at the world level. So the ambition is really to be another Silicon Valley or compete with the best in the world. Then there is a second tranche of clusters where they feel they have a good shot at moving into this first space, but they are not there yet. So they need a different type of support. And then there's a third level, which is much more the regional clusters, the regional interaction. Still very important, a lot of jobs, very important for regional economies, but not necessarily competing at the global level. Another example is Germany. Very different structure, federal structures. You have the lenders that are very important in economic development. And here we have an interesting mosaic of different types of programs that have been started. Most of the Bundesländer, the federal states, are running their own cluster programs for the more regional-oriented clusters. Then there is a set of programs started by the Ministry of Economics called Kompetenznetze, which is more nationally important clusters, but still a fairly large amount of clusters that are being helped where government policy is used to engage them and create the dynamism. And then recently, the Ministry of Science and Technology has added to that what they call the Spitzencluster competition, where it's really about the top clusters in the country where they feel that innovation needs to make a step change in the type of technologies that's being used, where it's only possible if you take together world-class companies, small and large, and world-leading research institutions, and then the government money can really help to kind of be the engine that helps them to come together and really make the necessary investments to move forward. So two different programs, and you really see that there is a very important element is how does that fit into the institutional structure of your government apparatus in order to make it work.
Okay.